No, so I'm Tobi. I'm one of the founders of Contorion. I studied business at WHU. After finishing my master's there, I co-founded CityDeal as part of Rocket back in early 2010. That got acquired by Groupon, and I was with CityDeal Groupon for 5 years in total, and then started Contorion.
This episode is brought to you by WHU, the Otto Beisheim School of Management. WHU is reshaping the way students learn about business, management, finance, and entrepreneurship through its innovative programs and partnerships in Germany and across the globe. To learn more about this globally ranked university, visit whu.edu today.
Hey folks, Gerrit here. In this episode, we introduce Tobi Tschötsch, founder and managing director of Contorion, a B2B online marketplace for industrial and trade supplies. We're talking about Tobi's fascinating startup journey from WHU to Rocket Internet to founder of a company acquired for over 100 million euros. So for you listeners out there who are interested in an exceptional founder's journey to incredible success, give this episode a listen. Hope you enjoy it.
Coming to you from WHU on the banks of the Rhine River in beautiful Vallendar, Germany. This is the best and most awesome founder podcast. A show about entrepreneurs, innovators, advisors, and educators, and the stories that make them who they are today.
Tobi Tschötsch, thank you so much for having me in your offices in Berlin. It's great to be here. As we talked about offline, I was here last year when I was coming to visit WHU and was incredibly impressed by what you have built. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. Cool. Well, one of the things that I like to do with all of our guests, since we are a founder podcast, is to understand a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey. So maybe you could start by kind of sharing your story of where you come from and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I studied business at WHU. Started with a bachelor degree. It was the first bachelor after diploma got stopped, and after my bachelor I decided to do a master's degree after that. And while I was studying, I think I was kind of on track to actually go into consulting because that still was in fashion back then. I guess it's still in fashion right now, so sorry if that comes across wrong. But then in my last internship, the summer internship 2009, I actually did that at Rocket as a kind of like entrepreneur in residence, as it was called, internship, and did that in a business there. eCareer was called, and I was just very overwhelmed in a positive way by kind of the way of working, by how much responsibility I got even just during an internship. But it wasn't particular to me, but also all the other people working there. And I could really see a big difference in the kind of work environments that I had experienced before while doing internships in consultancies or also corporates. And so that kind of got me thinking. And while then I was finishing my last semester, the guy who basically ran eCareer at the time, where I was interning, he gave me a call and was saying, "Hey, eCareer is turning out to not work out in the end, but we're onto a big idea here with Ollie. So the Samras, we're looking at an idea in the couponing space. Back then, Groupon was already running for a little bit in the US. So he showed me the US website, and he's like, we worked well together back at eCareer, although he had already had previous work experience and I hadn't. And he was like, "Do you want to start this with me?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah. Well, let me think about that." I was doing my semester in Hong Kong at the time, so I wasn't even at home. Yeah, and then I thought about it. Where do I actually start my career? And I decided to go for kind of like listen to my heart in terms of what work environment I really appreciated during those times of internships, and I decided to go for it. And that's where it started. Started in London. CityDeal UK. CityDeal was a bit of a kind of special setup in terms of the founding process, because it was a time where Rocket was really actively launching companies and actively launching companies in multiple countries at the same time. That's not how it's done anymore, but that's how it was back then in early 2010. So I was there with my co-founder in the UK, and there was a team in Germany, there was a team in France, and a team in Southern Europe for Italy, Spain. So we were launching these country operations, and quite quickly, after like half a year, got approached by Groupon, the US original that was also growing really fast at the time, because they were looking at a market entry in Europe and were seeing that we were already present in all the big markets, also leading in all the big markets. There were other players too. And so there these talks developed, and in the end we got acquired and joined forces. I mean, Groupon was still a startup in itself, so we got acquired, but that just meant we now owned kind of like Groupon shares, but less in terms of fraction, and not CityDeal anymore, and we just did this together. So we then built Groupon internationally. Groupon went public in November 2011 on the Nasdaq. Went public quite early in the history of the company, so that meant we had to deal with all sorts of issues after going public. So we were not profitable at the time. That's fine if you grow by more than 20% annually, so either growth or dividend stock. We actually went into getting our first growth pains at the time, because November 2011, Groupon was founded in 2008. So Groupon was 3 years old, CityDeal 2 years, so really young. Of course, that can happen, but we were also not profitable. So we were like neither. We're not a growth stock, not a dividend stock, and so we got under a lot of pressure. Had to standardize our processes and our reporting, because every country kind of like grew individually. So that's also when I switched from being responsible for like a country or a region. It was then Northern Europe at the time, to actually aligning processes for all our customer service and operations departments in all the countries outside the US. So I did that for a while, for over a year. I was then responsible as a COO for EMEA, so Europe, Middle and Eastern Africa, for the last year. A task there was to get it back to growth and back to profitability. So you can tell it's already a bit more troubled times, and getting back to profitability obviously also means you need to automate things. Means you also kind of potentially have to let go people, because you're able to automate things. Obviously, that in itself is not as much fun as building something, right? So that's one thing that then kind of triggered me thinking, okay, is this still the right thing to do? But B, and almost more importantly, it also changed the mindset and the atmosphere in the leadership team. So the organization that is used to growing and success is not growing anymore, maybe even shrinking. So people are like sticking out their elbows and wrestling for responsibility, and it gets more important who puts the name underneath a project than if the project is successful. And that was the point where I was like, okay, that's really why I decided to do startup in the beginning, to like not do this kind of stuff. And that's when I decided to move on. Decided to move on. Had quite a long notice period, so I had quite a bit of time to figure out what to do next. Started talking to different people that I knew actually also from university, also people from Project A that then later was our first investor at Contorion, because I knew the guys, and so they were looking at markets, and we started kind of looking at certain markets together they were looking at, and one of them was the market for, back then, just tools for either DIY or B2B customers. It wasn't really clear where we would take this when we started looking at the market, and then the longer we looked at it together, the more kind of I got intriguing to start something there, because it's a big market. Not much was happening online. We then decided to go more for the B2B side of things, together with my co-founders, because that's where there's a lot more in terms of like basket size, repurchasing and stuff. So it was the more interesting part of the market. And that's kind of how we started Contorion. More from the analyzing the market, etc. side, not from the romantic. My parents are craftsmen and they couldn't find stuff that they needed. That's what I've been doing for the last kind of now 5.5 years.
So did you even have a break? Did you go straight from one startup turned corporate to another one?
Short break of I think it was 2.5 months. The later part of these 2.5 months, I was already working on Contorion a little bit, but 2.5 months during the time actually my first son was born. So I actually had the time off just before and just after his birth. So.
Wow, that's an ambitious time to form a new company, huh?
In hindsight, yes, it was a lot going on. Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about how you kind of discovered, since you didn't come from a Handwerker family, actually, and maybe take it a step back for people that aren't familiar with Contorion, talk a little bit about your business model and kind of how you got to that business model from identifying different market opportunities.
Yeah, so the Contorion, we're selling we're selling tools and consumables to industrial companies and craftsmen. And also to DIY B2C customers, but more on the higher quality end. So typically you can compare our assortment to a DIY store, but more you get like where the DIY store stops in terms of the quality on the upper end, that's where we kind of start. So we have a little bit of overlap, but mostly we sell higher quality stuff. So and the main target groups are craftsmen, industrial companies. We started out actually as a marketplace. Now we're an e-commerce company, so we actually also business model-wise take the things on stock and deliver them from our warehouse mostly. We also have some wholesalers and some manufacturers that drop ship to our customers, but mostly we're kind of more in the e-commerce space than the marketplace space. And yeah, how we discovered or how I discovered the space, like I said, it was we did this together with Project A, and it was more like looking at kind of back then. So first of all, back then in terms of e-commerce and also or online marketplaces, we thought the B2C wave of at least big markets was kind of already past. So, obviously Amazon was there, Zalando was there, but also if you take consumer electronics is another big market, or travel, leisure as big markets in the B2C space, there were already tons of business models out there. But I think it was already at the time that it was getting more clear that in the B2B area, there are markets that are potentially a little bit more complicated in terms of serving them, but they are the bigger markets even in terms of market size. And so we started looking at the different B2B segments, and craftsmen and industrial companies with a need for similar products and craftsmen was one of the industries that we discovered. Also because not only it's a big industry, but there are existing players that for Germans are quite obvious, like Wirth. Wirth is a company that is quite present, also a kind of, I think, still founder or second generation founder-led family business, running crazy high margins and 10 billion revenue, so really solid business in terms of size, but also in terms of margin and everything. But with at least in today's world, kind of like a little bit of flawed business model, or a business model that is at least very, very difficult to take online. So you have a market that's big, and you have a market where the biggest players, I mean, it's fragmented, but the biggest players kind of really have difficulty going online because they rely on price intransparency to begin with, and so it's a big market. Existing players, traditional players, incumbents can't really go online, and then we started looking for what could be other reasons why this is not the right market or not the right timing. So we started looking at it. Okay, it's nice, it's a big market. It's nice that the market is fragmented, but our customers online. So we created keyword pools on Google without actually putting them live, and you can already kind of assess what the search volume is. So we looked at our customers online, and the search volume was there. And then we really started with customer interviews. So we started calling randomly, started calling people. I mean, obviously there's a lot of craftsmen out there that you can talk to. Where do you buy? Kind of just understand how they kind of solve the problem of getting their products that you are also trying to tackle, to understand whether there's really an issue or what the issue is, and then how you also approach it. Because if you obviously just come to the market and you're not solving a problem, then you're probably not going to sell much. So try to understand the customer and the customer problems, and then derived our business model kind of from there.
And what pain points did you focus your attention on? Was it speed? Was it cost? Was it simplicity of ordering online? Where did you find, what pain points did those craftspeople and DIY folks struggle with the most that you targeted?
Well, so simplicity to order online is definitely was not given at all. I think it was not the biggest pain point for craftsmen that they would point out themselves, but so bigger ones were, they were sourcing their stuff from multiple different suppliers. So not just ease of ordering online, but just generally ease of ordering, because there was not one place where they could get everything. They had to travel to different kind of stores, specialty stores, to source other stuff. It's time consuming. The second one, and also quite a big one, is price intransparency, and also knowing that you're kind of paying too much, but you can't do anything about it because prices are intransparent. That actually led to quite big frustration. So I think it's probably more on the emotional side. Well, obviously it's also factual. If you're just paying too much and you have a P&L, then obviously. But I think that's not even the main. It wasn't the main reason why craftsmen kind of got upset with it. Was that, but more that they felt like, hey, I'm not being treated right. I'm being charged too much, and the other side kind of knows it, but I can't do anything about it. So you have to imagine that our competitors at the time, they have list prices, but the list prices are they are prices nobody ever pays. They're really, really far away from the prices people pay in the end. And so you, depending on who you are and how well you negotiate as craftsmen, you get discounts from like 40% to 60%, in some categories even 80% discount. So the list price really doesn't mean anything. So customers had no kind of like good feeling for what like is a reasonable price that they should be paying. And so they also knew that sometimes the guy next door, who's in a similar business, he negotiated himself a much better price than they did. And so they felt kind of like mistreated.
It's an interesting conundrum because there's so many businesses that, make a living off price and transparency. And I was telling you offline that I had a business in the loyalty marketing, and the entire industry is based on nobody knows the value of the currency, right? Yeah. So you're solving a problem of transparency for your purchasers, but how do you rectify, I imagine those businesses don't necessarily want that level of transparency. Was that did you come into a point of conflict there that you had to find a solution for?
Well, yes. So the businesses that were buying from us, they want that transparency. It's just the competitors in the market, obviously, they don't want that. So, yes, I think our competitors never liked us when we started doing this. The good thing about the dominant competitors was that they were selling 100% own brand. So they're like, it was never in question that they would give us their own brand, because yes, they don't want price transparency, so they wouldn't give us. We didn't think we would get it, so that was out of the question. But then there were A brands that were already selling through a network of dealers, wholesalers, mostly regional, but also there. not much was happening online, and so prices were still intransparent, prices were still high. So even for us in the beginning, it was difficult to get even supply, so to get manufacturers to work with us, because we were approaching them as as we are the online player, and they were like, no, and like between the lines they told us that it's not really that we don't want, but if we do this, all of our network of suppliers is basically, or like resellers is basically gonna revolt.
Mm-hmm. Did that end up being a challenge? I imagine with these big companies, if they come into the e-commerce space, especially at that time, somehow you're going to end up undercutting their other sales channels.
Yeah, so it ended up changing our business model a bit, because what we did in order to get certain manufacturers and brands, we did the switch from marketplace to e-commerce. So for some it was necessary to actually take inventory. So even if we could convince a wholesaler to work with us, sometimes the manufacturer would say, no, wholesalers cannot sell to other resellers. They can only sell to end customers. So we couldn't get certain brands, and certain brands that were actually quite high in demand by our customers. So we actually did that switch, and there was quite a big switch, even to some extent sometimes painful switch on the VC side, because e-commerce was not such a hot topic compared to marketplace. And the second switch that we did, or change, wasn't as big, but we actually did a physical store. We opened a physical store that we still have today. It's just one store, but we opened a physical store so that in the end we were able to change our pitch towards manufacturers. So we then approached manufacturers with a pitch saying, we're a specialty dealer. We have a warehouse. We have a physical store. Of course, we also have an online store. Never mind that the online store does 99% of the revenue. We never talked about that part, but we changed our pitch. And when we changed our pitch, that changed the game, because then we also realized what I said before. It's not that the manufacturers really didn't want to work with us. It's that they needed a good explanation to go back to their existing dealers and say, look, there's nothing I can do about working with Contorion, because they just fulfill all the criteria that you fulfill as well.
Right. So did you kind of open that physical store almost as a business development prop, or did you ever have intention of scaling it in a brick and mortar? No. Not really. That's creative. Yeah, really cool.
And it's still just one store today.
Right.
5 years later, 4 years later. Yeah.
I want to touch on something that I heard you mention a couple times when you mentioned Project A Ventures, the VC. If I understood reading between the lines, you brought on a VC partner really early on in the game. How far along did you get before you decided to take that venture capital money? Because that's a pretty big step.
True. We got to the point of fleshing out the business model, kind of how we want to approach the market, doing customer interviews and researching basically if there's a need and things like that. We got the funding basically just at the time of launching our kind of prototype. Was like we launched the shop, but we didn't really put any marketing on, just to test the processes. That's when we started the fundraising process. But I think also there two factors. One, we knew that this. So when I say we, I have two co-founders, Freddie and Richard. We knew that this business was going to be capital intensive. So it's not the typical kind of bootstrapping business that we're starting, because you do need a certain scale. You do need to invest in customer acquisition to build your business. And B, the other thing is, I think that the fact that having the network, knowing each other, with Project A, also helped in just getting the funding pre-revenue. I think that's not always doable to get a VC on board pre-revenue. I think Project A is probably among a couple of others like Cherry or whatever that do invest pre-revenue, but I think a lot of VCs don't do that on a bigger scale.
I mean, you were almost pre-proof of concept at that point, huh? So that's a pretty impressive to be able to acquire that kind of partner early on in the game. That's really cool. So you went through this experience, you raised capital, you made your kind of primary pivot from marketplace to e-commerce, opened the store, grew the customer base. Can you kind of talk about where that has led you to, where you are now? I know you had a change of ownership process over the past couple of years. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the iteration of our business model just continued, just I think as it's normal for building a business. So that led to the fact that we actually also started experimenting with a sales team. That team is now the biggest team of Contorion, actually, not by much, but it's the biggest team. It's an inside sales team, so it works on the phone. But we tested it out with 2 people calling out B2B customers after we acquired them, and seeing whether that has any effect on kind of like the development of the cohorts in the CRV, and it had a positive effect. So that's why we grew the team, so we iterated on the model. Went deeper into the B2B space, and also understood our segments further. By that, I think we're able to, at least online, I would say, become the leading player for craftsmen, for the kind of assortment that we sell. That kind of drew the attention at some point, actually, of a family business in Munich that then in the process decided to acquire us and approached us. So we actually didn't. We were in a phase of, okay, we just raised our Series B in that summer, and then we got approached in kind of December. So our funding, obviously, we still had a lot of runway with our funding by Hoffmann, by the family business, to start talking about whether it makes sense to kind of like join forces. And at the beginning we thought, no way this is gonna work out, because German family businesses usually also don't invest kind of the amount of money that they would have to do, knowing our valuation at the time, etc. But they approached us with the mindset of, they were serious. I think they understood kind of that also they had a business model that relied a bit on kind of field sales and also in terms of the price transparency, similar things, that we were kind of a good addition to how they are structured and set up. So the talks continued. We actually didn't do a structured process where we tried to get other buyers in, but that's the one party we talked to. And if it wouldn't have worked out, we just would have continued on our journey to continue building this kind of VC funded. And then Hoffmann acquired us roughly 2 years ago, so in late summer 2017. Since then we've just continued building the business together with them, and luckily, I'm gonna knock on wood, all the things that we discussed with Hoffmann during the process, they've kind of stayed true to. So the things like letting us work independently here in Berlin, and as us as a unit, and not needing to take kind of like tools and processes from a corporate parent, but really staying an independent startup unit. Has stayed that way, and also Hoffmann continued to fund our growth, and so we've been able to keep up the momentum and keep expanding in our markets. It was just really a change in ownership, and somebody else who basically funded that growth and who brought different things to the table than the VC owner before. Namely more industry knowledge and more logistics knowledge, so kind of like more knowledge related to our market and our operation. So that's why I guess also we are all still here, like all of us, all the 3 co-founders, also team-wise. We are doing really well retaining the people that were here at the time we got acquired. Obviously, that's always a big fear, also for us and also for Hoffmann. So
obviously there's a great benefit of a liquidity event taking place with a change of ownership. Can you tell me a little, coming from growing a startup on your own, now you've got a big institutional backer behind you that's obviously providing capital, mm-hmm. but how did that change the growth trajectory of your business and the operations of it as well? What did you find that they were able to bring in, obviously, aside from cash?
Yeah, so there was a big discussion between us founders also when we talked about do we want to sell now, and do we want to do this together with this parent company? Was what do they bring to the table? I mean, I think that number one, besides cash, let's stay at that first, because when I talked about the Groupon journey before. We're in a situation with Contorion, we're building a VC-funded business, which means there needs to be a liquidity event in the end. So because the VC will want to have a return on what they put in. And liquidity event in case of success is always going to be either IPO or some sort of trade sale. And so it's not that like there was a third alternative to say, okay, we're just never going to sell to anyone and we're just going to keep doing what we want to do. And so on that cash point, and also on the alternative of an IPO, I had gone through the Groupon experience where, when we started Contorion, actually at first we thought we're going to make this big. Obviously, everybody starts with a dream. We're going to make this big, and obviously also the aim is to take this IPO, and it's a model that can be big enough to take it IPO. Then when we talked to Hoffmann, actually, I kind of revisited that kind of. Why is that like the goal here, and is that actually a good goal relative to the experience that I had with Groupon, where being public also has certain drawbacks, where you get much more into a quarterly thinking than a long-term thinking, and you're under pressure by owners that you cannot choose, and so they have own interests. Maybe they also get in conflict with each other, and you're just stuck in the middle. So things like that, where just having a sole owner, a family business owner with that has a tradition and has a certain stability, that also puts a certain stability into that cash and the support component, that I think is in the end, that's also how it worked out for us, luckily, is really important. So even if nothing else would have happened, other support, even just getting this stability, I think also has been a big benefit for us. But on top of that, I think the biggest advantage that we're getting, and we're still also in the process of getting, is logistics know-how. So our assortment that we're selling is really complex, from, you can imagine, like small bits and drills that really small and to handle, all the way up to large workshop trolleys and bulky things that you can only ship with haulier and that are difficult to handle. Just the warehouse operation and everything else, also the terms with the couriers and the hauliers and all that stuff is complicated. And so having that knowledge from Hoffmann, also having the conditions that purchasing conditions and negotiating power that they have with somebody like DHL, etc., was really helpful, and just brought us just a step change in terms of savings, also in the direct costs, for example. And then also the other big part besides logistics was the assortment knowledge and the relationships that Hoffmann has to the suppliers. So we share common suppliers. Hoffmann obviously shares a long history with these suppliers, and has oftentimes has also good purchasing conditions with these suppliers that we can also then rely on.
I want to kind of ask the same question, but I want to frame it a little bit differently from the perspective of a founder. A little while back, I had Tim Taba, who's also a WHU alum, and they IPO'd Credit Shelf, and I was asking him how his life has changed. He said, my role is completely different now. I'm constantly at shareholder meetings. There's increased levels of transparency. Of course, you're dealing with quarterly earnings reports. Very different from although they try to they try to maintain the culture of a startup, but on the day-to-day operations, specifically of the CEO founder, it becomes very, very different. How has your role changed, what you and your, I guess, co-founders, from really being the end decision ends with us, maybe board members in some cases and investors, to now working within a much larger hierarchy? Do you feel like you have where do you maintain the autonomy, and where do some things start to change?
Yeah, good question. So luckily, upwards, not much has changed. So the cadence of like having board meetings, before we had them with our VC, now we have them with our like parent company. The cadence hasn't changed, and also kind of like the information that we provide and things that we discussed, by and large, haven't changed. So that luckily, we don't, as founders, have a lot more duties to report things upwards and keep people in the loop. So that's really, really helpful. So we can actually, be involved in developing the company. And but in a larger organization, but not just in a larger organization, I don't know, I'm not sure if it has to do with larger organization or also with just culturally work and how it's carried out and hierarchy changing over time. At least I feel that the last 5 years, maybe it's just my kind of like enlightenment, or I finally get it, or maybe I'm just getting it wrong. I don't know, but I think that decision power is much more distributed now, not just because we're bigger, and it's not just distributed to a different hierarchy level from the founders to kind of like the second level, but we are actually trying wherever we can to push decision making and responsibility down on the lowest level, really. And it means that the role of you as a founder, but also even of the heads of departments that we have, is also changing to much more of kind of like a facilitator, more than actually, you sit there and you like take all the decisions and you just, monopolize power in some weird way. I think that it doesn't work that way here anymore. It's not like that it was like that at the beginning, but I feel that it's definitely been a development over time that actually, yes, decisions are being taken not by us, but by the group.
I want to ask you a little piece about that. You've had a really interesting career trajectory, almost a frenetic going from startup to corporate to startup to corporate. Yeah. It's like, and all the changes that go along. Right. It's not a bad cycle to be in your case, I think. But, I'm curious in terms of, especially for founders that are in the process of team building, that is such a big challenge. It can make or break a startup. And I posed this question to Tim post-IPO as well on a similar topic. How do you find, as someone that had to recruit and build a team as a startup and now recruit and bring on employees as part of a different organization, do you find you're still able to attract the same types of personas into the corporate, more stable environment versus the one that might be higher risk reward of an option early stage employee? What's the difference? How does it change?
So I think it definitely changes over time. I've seen a much stronger contrast at Groupon, actually, from like early days, founding days, to then being public and being a much bigger company than Contorion is right now. So the profiles do change quite a bit. The things that people are motivated by are changing, and I mean not just like monetarily or upside wise, but also kind of the type of work they like to carry out and the things they enjoy. So I think in early days, it's rather the employees who enjoy making big chaos to kind of small chaos. That's that's kind of like early days, and then later on, you need people who optimize like the remainders, who take it from like 95 to 100%, and that maybe is just as much effort, those 5%, obviously, than getting it to getting the first 80. But the people who like to get the first 80, they don't enjoy also optimizing those last 5, and but on a bigger scale, that's obviously necessary at some point to improve the business further, and also just generally even just being more cautious with bigger scale, just taking whatever, if we put something live and or whatever, like the features that we develop, the downtime that is acceptable, like at a bigger scale, everything is just hurts much more if you do a mistake, and so definitely the nature changes, and also the nature of the people that apply to the company changes. Not like I said, I've seen a much bigger change at Groupon than I have at Contorion, and still try although like knowing that you do need different types later on, I do try to look that there's people who come on board that do have a big like drive in themselves to kind of like make things better, and as long as that's given, as long as you don't get too much of a feeling that people are just here to just to stay from a certain hour to another hour and then receive a paycheck at the end of the month, but that they actually come with a certain drive, whether it's the drive to get it from 95 to 100 or from 1 to 80, that doesn't matter that much. It's just you need just the energy and the kind of also the self motivation.
Right. It's interesting that, those are different personas, right? And, I talk about this a lot, that there's founders and optimizers, there's builders and managers, and they're very distinctively different personas, generally speaking. You have worn both hats, and you kind of forcibly or fortunately evolved from one into the other. Now that you've been straddling both sides, which one are you? Are you a builder or are you an optimizer?
I mean, probably Hoffman shouldn't listen to this, but I think I'm more of a builder than I'm an optimizer. Yeah. So obviously, like the good thing about the role change, I think, is that the day-to-day. Not sure it's actually true, but I think the day-to-day, on that level, on the founder level. That it changes, yes, but you're not impacted as much as if it was really, a job level day to day of whatever a certain role that you're carrying out. Where at the beginning, like I said, it's big chaos, and you make it to small chaos, and then later on it's something completely different. But as a founder, when you're more on the facilitating role. Then you're not as much impacted what kind of problem you optimize. But yes, you still are, and it still changes. And I think I'm more of a builder than a...
Yeah, I couldn't imagine being on the other side. As soon as I feel like a manager, it's time for me to try something different. But I want to just dig into the weeds one more time between these two contrasts, because I think it's such a unique position to be in, especially twice. So just to dig a little deeper on the details of it, maybe you could talk a little bit about like how your kind of KPIs and your measurements of success change from being a growth stage startup to then having that acquisition where you can kind of assume there's a little more of a stabilization point to a certain degree there. Do you measure differently than you used to, or do you still kind of have those same KPIs?
The big KPIs are actually still the same, but I mean, we measure more, obviously. We measure more in our management team. So before, obviously, you're just, you look at the top line and you look at your margin and you look at the marketing costs and you're basically kind of almost done. And that's enough also to guide you for quite a while. But when you're bigger, obviously you start looking deeper down until the bottom line. That's one thing. But also just with the organization growing, it gets more complex because that the organization grows, teams grow, and even within the teams, within marketing, within category management, whatever, there's roles that are more specialized. And so, whereas before in marketing, I could look at my marketing cost ratio and basically just talk to the whatever head of marketing. Now there's the different specialization on the different channel, or in the categories, the different categories. And so actually you need to drill down deeper in order to really understand what's driving it, or also to understand where can I get growth from next year, etc. So it does get more complex, and also just thinking about it now where we talk about it, that's also where you get to the point of like going from building to more, okay, you need to also be concerned with the details a bit more and have the, kind of the persistence, not in terms of persistence to build, but persistence to like go deeper and deeper and deeper into the detail to understand the detail. And that's also where you need more numbers. So I think that's, we were looking at more numbers.
want to get into the secret sauce a little bit. I think a big part of our audience is young people that are passionate about entrepreneurship or thinking about starting businesses themselves. You've been on 2 pretty meteoric rise successes. Maybe you have some tips for aspiring or early stage entrepreneurs, some lessons that you've learned that you might be willing to share.
One thing, it's a very difficult one for me to say, so that nobody in the past process kind of gets their toes stepped on. But so let's say 1, treat customers right, treat employees right, and so I've seen. So let's try abstract. I've seen cases also within companies that I've seen closely where customers, in order to get certain revenue, let's say for a certain quarter, because that's what you needed to deliver, or to make something look nice because somebody else is looking at your numbers, were squeezed, were refused to give some sort of money back in a gray zone, whatever, and I've seen it come back at you all the time. I don't think you can do this when you really want to build a sustainable business, because the customer does remember this kind of stuff and eventually will not come back. So I think that most businesses, unless you kind of have businesses in the funeral space where you just do this service once and you're gone, but most of businesses rely on coming back, customers coming back, and them some sort of customer lifetime value. So I think you should, in case of doubt, never cut corners on the customer, but always do it right for the customer, and that also can mean that in some early cases when you do mistakes you pay on top, but you need to pay on top because otherwise it's going to get more expensive. I think it's very similar on the employee side. I think especially for young founders, but also generally, I see that founders care a lot about their business, think a lot about their business. That can lead to the fact that you think you know more, you know better. Maybe also when you're a founder, or when you even founded multiple times, and you've always been kind of at the top. You should, the feedback doesn't come to you maybe anymore. You're probably doing things wrong all the time, but people don't tell you, or they tell you less than they should. And so it's really risky, either just as a founder generally, or as somebody who's founded several times, to think that you know things better, you know it all. And I think that's generally not going to motivate anyone, obviously, in the long term. And it's bad for the culture that you build, because you're going to monopolize decisions, and you're not going to hand out responsibility. And while that works at the beginning, because it's a small organization, and you can decide a lot of things, and you can also carry the responsibility and kind of steer everyone. At some point, you're not going to be able to steer everyone. But if everyone's used to being steered and being told what to do, then they're not going to be able to walk independently, or even just grow independently, or grow the business independently. So I think you don't feel the effect early on, but I think it's very important early on that you build it the right way, and do hand out responsibility and distribute that to as many people as possible.
Yeah, it's great wisdom, and I was telling you offline that I just got back from Techstars. We were going through the selection process. It's a mentor-driven program. The entire program is based on bringing in brilliant mentors to advise entrepreneurs that are often myopically focused on their end result. And like you said, when you've been on the top all the time, maybe you're not listening. Did you have mentors? You went straight from university into being a multiple-time founder. Did you have people that inspired you, gave you feedback, and kind of gave you some of that wisdom along the way, or was it trial and error?
I think I was more the trial and error person. Plus, thinking about it, actually, I tend to have fairly close relationships with, either my co-founder. So actually in both cases, Groupon and also here at Contorion, we are super open with each other with us as co-founders. So we give each other feedback all the time, and also at Groupon we did that. At Groupon I'm also still good friends with a lot of people from there, also co-founder, and we also exchange and also challenge ourselves quite regularly. But also I've always been fairly close with just the people that I'm working with or that are working with me or for me, although I really hate saying for me, but work with me. And so they've also quite a few actually developed into friends over time. So that I think I was a little bit less in the position that people feel they can't tell me if something's wrong. So I think I've also gotten quite a bit of feedback just over time from the people that I've been working with.
Well, you've brought up Groupon a few times, and when I think of Groupon, I think of an era past almost. Mm-hmm. You've now been in the tech world for about a decade. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of a two-part question. One is, do you still stay involved somehow in startups? Do you participate in the startup ecosystem in any way? And if so, how have you seen it change over these very formative years of growth in Germany?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I do now invest a little bit also as a business angel. I think, but that's a more recent kind of thing. So first of all, yes, I've seen a change over time. I mean, like I said in the beginning, when we started Groupon or CityDeal, we started it in multiple countries at the same time. So you basically internationalize before even proving the path to kind of even getting to somewhere large, somewhere profitable in your home market, and you already take it to other markets. I think that is a pattern that I've seen changing quite a bit. So that I think businesses now and VCs also look at that more. That you kind of prove something before you kind of throw a lot of money in it and multiply it. Then there's also all the changes in the industries that are also coming up, like e-commerce, marketplace, SaaS, fintech, etc. So those, and I think that generally the spaces that you're operating in, they get smaller or more specialized, right? So like even when we are looking at Contorion, we were really surprised that there's such a big market still not tapped. And I think on the B2C side, a lot of the markets that size have been long tapped. So if you want to start something, you need to look much harder and deeper to find the niche or find the right thing to where to kind of enter. So that's one. And the other thing that I see now is that businesses that started 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even more recent to some extent, they get overtaken again by new competition coming in. And so I see that for different kind of business models, that also there you can't really rely on the fact that you started a company 10 years ago to not get out innovated in your market.
Right. It's interesting what you said is how you've got to really start digging deeper now. And you found an opportunity in the world that was untapped and were able to kind of fill a niche. Nowadays, having to go that much deeper, maybe the approach that you took is more challenging than it used to be. Mm-hmm. Having some domain or sector expertise to really understand the mechanics of how the business operates is the only thing that may really allow you to get that deep, huh? Yeah. Cool. I mean, I could talk about this all day. I think it's really interesting, but with all of the guests on these episodes, I try to ask a couple questions that provides a little insight into the individual. Most people hate it, so apologies in advance, but do learn a lot from people in the process. Yeah. So first question is, if you're reading anything right now, what book is on your bedside table?
The book on bedside table is Shoe Dog. I think it's not a particularly new book from the founder of Nike.
Cool. Have you found any insights out of?
Well, I'm like I think 1/3 through, but hustling and not giving up and being persistent, right? I don't know if you've read it, but like the stuff he did like really early on, studies the fly to Japan and pitched like some sort of stuff to back then Onitsuka Tiger, I think it was in Japan, or like I think it's Essex now or whatever. But and just how that like how long it all took but how committed he was. I think was great to learn so far, and there's probably more insights to come.
And being that you're in the music capital of Germany, or certainly one of them, I'm going to ask you to exclude any children's music that might be on your playlist, because I imagine there's some of that too. But what are you listening to right now?
We're actually going to a concert in a couple of weeks by somebody I think that is not that well known yet. His name is Marc Rebillet. He basically is, how do you call it? He calls himself the loop daddy. So he basically produces all the music himself. You know, he's got these loop stations where he can do drum loops, but also plays the piano or keyboard, and so he does, and so he produces, and it's all improvised. He doesn't have an album. I think he's thinking about doing an album, but it's all improvised. So he produces everything on the spot. He does it once a week. He has he goes live, I think, on Sunday for a couple of hours, and the audience can actually submit topics that he then does music about. He's a bit crazy, so don't judge me if you happen to look at it and think what the fuck. I think it's a great talent that he has to do this all on the spot,
So amazing. Yeah, I've been listening to a woman named Tash Sultana. She also does this the loop stuff, and amazing when someone's playing all those different instruments and singing layers on top of it. Very cool. Tobi Tschötsch, thank you so much for inviting me to your office, taking the time out of your busy day. It was a pleasure to have this conversation, and look forward to sharing your story with your alma mater and hopefully more people. So.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a pleasure. Great podcast, or great questions. I really enjoyed the conversation. Didn't feel very long at all. Cool. Thanks.
Well, folks, that was Tobi Tschötsch, founder and managing director of Contorion. If you're interested in learning more about Tobi's work, check out Contorion's website at contorion.de. Coming soon in episode 12, we'll speak with another WHU alum, Janis Fischer. His journey from WHU to small business owner to sole founder and CEO of a rapidly growing software as a service company, Zen Homes, aka Vermietet.de, is absolutely riveting, to say the least. Bis nächstes Mal.